I got to practice my skills with Shabbos. Shabbos, when somebody was being thoughtful and decided to turn it back on to do something with our fridge. And then when you do it, you don't look again to make sure it's still done, you just assume it was done. So it was set and it was unset. Those refrigerators. I mean, I keep saying, I know there's a Sabbath one on here, I just can't figure out how to do it. I'm like, well, that's all right. And anyway, so he figured, he knew exactly, it was 10 grade and down, he knew exactly what to do. Well, exactly-ish that we had a problem. And then we just opened the fridge, I just took everything out I needed, I had an extra fridge, the garage was cold, and I didn't have him touch, I just.
The Shabbos mode on the fridge controls the light or more than that?
More than that. It's the light, the ice maker, and also I think it's the temperature sensor also goes on and off like at intervals as opposed to as you open the fridge and let it cold air. I think it's at least those 3 features. I'm not sure what about it, but I had a lot. I have notes, I have a lot to think about. I don't need this, I'm not sure if it's a secret yet, I don't think it matters. And he ended up just coming in and he really wanted to know how to work the shop. So I was like, one day I'll be there.
I'll show you how to do it.
I feel like I need to post it on the fridge. For all of our Gentile friends. Okay, anyway.
Okay, good. We're in the middle of the Isurei D'Oraisa that you can ask a non-Jew to do. So the first case was Ben Hashmashos, which technically then becomes an Isur D'Rabbanan, and therefore anytime a Shvus to Shvus would normally be okay, so even an Isur D'Oraisa is going to be okay. And then the second one was a Psik Reisha, where you are asking the non-Jew to do something directly, which is not a malacha, at least not a malacha per se. It's just going to lead to a malacha. And even if the malacha that it leads to is a D'Oraisa, whereas a Jew would certainly not be able to do it, so you'd be able to tell the non-Jew to do it because you're not really telling him to do the malacha, you're telling him to do the permitted act, and then the malacha just happens by the way. Okay, it should have been the refrigerator case, although I'm sure it's LED anyway, so it's downgraded anyways. Okay, yeah. All right, the third case where you could ask a non-Jew to do a malacha d'oraisa will be a chol she'en bo sakana. So we touched on this in Shvus to Shvus by D'Rabbanan, so this is the other side of the coin. So anytime there is a chola where there is a life-threatening situation, so then one does not need to get a non-Jew involved. According to many and in most situations, it's preferable for the Jew to deal with it themselves. But where it is not life-threatening, so that's where there's going to be rules that will limit the Jew from taking care of himself. So the big differentiating point will be whether or not you are considered a chola or it is simply a what we would call a mixas choli or a michush ba'alma, a sick person versus a person who is experiencing a discomfort. So people who are experiencing discomfort, Chazal made Isurei D'Rabbanan upon them from doing anything that is explicitly medicinal, including taking medicine and the like. And in those cases, even to ask a non-Jew to do a malacha d'oraisa would also be a d'Rabbanan, and therefore it would be usur. The only leniency we had before was to ask a non-Jew to do an isur d'Rabbanan to take care of a michush or a mixas choli. That you could do. That's what we had before. That would be shvus to shvus in a makom of sickness. Mixas choli. Here we're describing a person who is a chola. They are officially halachically ill. Therefore, the rabbis did not make a isser upon them. Therefore, if you're a Jew, you could take medicine, and you could really do most isurei d'Rabbanan in order to take care of the chola situation. The most optimal isur d'Rabbanan to avail yourself would be using a non-Jew. And that would be even for the non-Jew to do a malacha d'oraisa, because a Jew asking a non-Jew to do a malacha d'oraisa is really just a iser d'Rabbanan. So once the rabbi said, in a case of chola, she'ein bo sakana, we're not going to enforce d'Rabbanan iser, we're only going to enforce Torah iser. So the first d'Rabbanan to go is going to be the d'Rabbanan that you don't have to do anything yourself. So it would be a mir la'akum. So to define a chola sheyesh bo sakana, besides for saying it's not mixas choli, would be to say basically one of two definitions that we'll use in a general sense. Any person who is running a temperature above what is normal for that person, so assume 100 and above, or 99 and a half, if a person knows that their temperature is less than that, that becomes a chola. That means that there's a fever, means that the body is reacting to something and you are halakhically sick, which means that you could take medicine and you could have a non-Jew do a malacha d'oraisa on your behalf. Without getting into temperature, since not all painful situations involve a temperature, so Chazal give the basic description of someone who is so in pain that they need to lie down. Okay, I don't love that definition because this is going to depend on everyone's threshold, and a lot of people, a little bit, they have to lie down, and other people can, plow through a real issue. So the other definition they give, which I think works better, but it's the same idea, when the pain affects your whole essence. In other words, when someone has a mosquito bite, so the mosquito bite itches, nothing else is an issue. When a person has a slight headache, they have a slight headache, but the rest of their essence is okay. When a person has a migraine, if you've experienced one, I haven't, but it's been described as your entire body is affected by it. Right? I can't describe. If a person breaks something, it doesn't just hurt locally. The entire body feels the effects of that. So that would be the same thing as saying you need to lie down, because it's not a localized, limited pain. It's something that is all-encompassing. Just Chazal used the terminology so that means you just want to lay down. So that's what we're going to use. Yeah. So,
I want to make sure a lot of
yeah.
Would it be fair to say that when your entire body is in physical distress, like, because you're talking about like this God forbid is injured seriously, but the rest of me is freaking out too.
Yes. Are we talking mentally or physically? Because
okay.
So we'll talk about mental in a few minutes. But yeah, obviously, if the pain is, whether it be a migraine or a broken bone, it's all going to be localized primarily. But the difference in severity of pain is your whole body feels it, or your whole essence feels it. It's a different level of pain. I think in the hospitals, they actually, what do you call it? They ask, they try to measure pain. They say it's a level 5 pain, 6 pain, 7 pain, 8 pain. And then when you ask them what they're talking, they actually have like a little chart with people's faces freaking out or whatever. Same idea. At a certain point, a person knows the difference between my, finger hurts, my arm hurts, and I'm in so much pain that I hurt. That's already a different level. Yeah.
What about chronic or other things that might not be like that are broken bones?
Right, okay, so it does not need to be life-threatening. That's by definition. It does need to be debilitating in the sense that it affects your whole thing. So if it's a you could have a person could have a chronic, joint issue, knee issue, but it's chronically annoying. It's not chronically, painful, but
medicine for high blood pressure.
So and that's all I without being a doctor, I mean, I would ask, but I would make the assumption that all those things are rooted in that if things go bad, it's life-threatening. So that's certainly going to be okay. In general, just as far as halacha, anytime any medicine that needs to be taken constantly automatically becomes, just as far as it's not really an Amir Lakim, because medicine is really your own personal durabanan, but any medicine that needs to be taken on a daily basis will be allowed to be taken on Shabbos. The poskim say that if it's possible to arrange the daily taking of it when it is not a life-threatening thing, it's more of just a chronic issue, to try to arrange taking it right before dinner or right after dinner so that you can do it Friday before Shabbos and Motzei Shabbos. But a lot of medicines specifically are made to be before bed or when you wake up. And any of those is, once the doctor says that for it to be effective, you need to take it every day. So I think the working assumption in halacha is if you need to take something daily, that means it's a chola situation. It's not, no one takes a daily medicine for something that is just a minor ailment, because most people, the minor ailment is easier to deal with than no medicine is 100. All medicines have their, secondary effects at some level. So I don't think anyone would take a medicine continually for something which is a minor ailment. I think a little bit by definition, if you're taking it daily, it's because there's, a real issue. And it could be that when taken daily, that real issue doesn't manifest itself. But that's the whole idea. That's what you're trying to accomplish. Yeah.
Now talking about the shua, but
Yeah.
while we're on the topic, does it matter how the medication is taken? Like, for example, an oral pill, oral liquid,
So
suppository,
it has to be
eye drops,
it has to be non-d'oraisa violation. So medicine in its essence is d'Rabbanan. If the medicine is applied by rubbing a cream, then that's a d'oraisa application, or at least a potential d'oraisa application. That's going to be a problem if it's not more life-threatening. That would have to be dealt with. But a pill, whether it be a liquid, all those will all be the same, as long as the application of it doesn't violate something. If it's medicine's medicine, right? It's only going to be how it's applied, and off the top of my head, it's creams that are going to give you the biggest problem. Also, I suppose anything that needs to be any type of medicinal, something that it requires some sort of electronic surrounding to it could run into issues. Those usually will be d'Rabbanan too, but that would get into how lenient we are on electricity. By Amir La'akim, we treat electricity as d'Rabbanan, but you'd have to find out in every given situation exactly what's going on. I would ask. It's sometimes will be okay and sometimes not. But yeah, as far as medicine is concerned, it won't make a difference if it's an eye drop, ear drop, nose drop, spray, spritz, it'll all be the same, pill, liquid, the only thing would be a cream that pops in, top of my head. But the need to do it daily would usually, I would default into without a specific, like a unusual scenario, would almost always mean it would classify as a chola, because again, I don't think doctors want to put you on a medicine constantly for, a sunburn or a mosquito bite or a light headache. Okay. So, but as far as it's tangentially related, but as far as the Amir La'akim is concerned, you're asking the non-Jew, which is the d'Rabbanan, even to do a d'oraisa, to relieve a situation that involves a temperature, and again, a illness that affects the whole body. I would say similar to this would be anything that qualifies as an infection would be something that you'd want to deal with. Infections already borderline on yesh bo sakana, because infections are particularly dangerous in their nature, but certainly any type of infection a person would be able to deal with on Shabbos through a guide. So the common things that you'd have the guy do, you could have the guy, again, fill out a prescription. Theoretically, you could have a guy drive to a pharmacy to pick up something. Carrying wouldn't be an issue. The driving wouldn't be an issue. All those things, when you call, when a person has to call 911 or whatever like that. So effectively, what you're doing is you're telling a guy to do a whole battery full of malachos, and that's what you're doing. As far as you calling the 911, so you do with a shino, you knock it off. Try to dial the last number with the 9. Like people say, dial the one with your nose or whatever. But again, this is only when it's not a sakana. If it's a sakana, then all bets are off. So you'd have to. We would almost had the case. We ended up not needing this because we found someone. We had, in one of our outdoor minyanim. So during the COVID era, so somebody slipped, and they were in tremendous, a younger person, but still they slipped. They were in tremendous pain. The type of pain that, again, you just need to see, and you see the difference between someone who's got hurt and someone who is really hurting. So he had said that he had earlier in his life done damage to his shoulder, and he feels that the shoulder and the fall popped back out and whatever. So this would be, you're not going to register a temperature, but this would be your whole body pain. So technically, right, we could get the non-Jew to do everything, right? So the problem is getting in contact with the non-Jew. So it wasn't life-threatening, at least not to our assessment, and I don't think it was life-threatening, but it was extremely painful. So there, if you're going to need to call, so then you just have to deal with, again, you're doing the Durabanan, assuming it's hard to imagine that a phone call is going to involve a Doraisa, but if making the connection, making the hookup, any of those things, so they like to be machmer that you do it with a shinui, some sort of different, element. Back to the day where it's not a cell phone, but you knock the phone off the hook with your elbow, you dial the last number in a funny dip away. Or here, sometimes it would help to have a kid maybe dial the last number or whatever. But here we found someone jogging, this was in the morning, found someone jogging on the street, which is a everyday occurrence around here. And we just asked them to call on our behalf. And then again, asking even if calling would be a d'oraisa, the act of calling the phone and making the text, that's also going to be all fine, because we asked the non-Jew to call, and the doctors came. And I would say the biggest upshot of the whole thing was trying to get someone to be able to go with the person who was hurt, who was from out of town visiting, because it was during the COVID era, and they were very strict on other people being there. That was far more difficult. The Amir al-Akam was easy because everything was okay, because he was in real serious pain. So so those would be the standard ways: getting medicine, getting medical attention, doing whatever is needed to help the person. Because once the person is in a matzav of being a chola, so then the raisa by a non-Jew is mutter. So then you just tell them, it's not like you have to tell them you can only do this, you can do whatever you want. This guy is a chola, you've got to take care of him, whatever it takes. And that would work. Okay, now as a sidebar to this, Bishul Akum, which is an Isser Durabanan, also gets waived for the chola. So in the situation where, and this, I would suppose this would come out more likely in a situation where someone is being tended to by a non-Jew or something like that, or a situation where a Jew needs, let's say, chicken soup or something like that. If you deal with tea, let's say a person has a sore throat, let's make it certainly a cholish, he's got strep or whatever, and it certainly is in the category of a chola, so he can have something done. And okay, so if you could make tea without violating Shabbos, that's wonderful. Okay, but let's say the case is you don't have that set up, so the person is in great pain and they're sick, so they want a cup of tea. So here you're not going to have a bishul akum issue, because tea is water and water is not subject to the bishul akum. But the point is, you could ask the non-Jew to make the tea. That would be another example of doing an Isser Doraisa for a sick person, assuming it's a real need for the sick person. I'm giving an example that may not be a perfect example, but it's the idea that there's no difference between driving in the car and cooking the tea. They're both d'oraisa, and if the sick person needs it, the sick person needs it. If it would be a situation where a person needed to eat, okay, again, more likely in a situation where someone is bedridden, someone can't take care of themselves, and they are significantly ill and they need energy, they need to eat. So there, a non-Jew would be able to cook on Shabbos, and it wouldn't be a bishul akum issue either, because that's also a d'Rabbanan. So just as far as understanding, right, just like the Amir La'akum becomes mutter because it's Amir La'akum is a d'Rabbanan, and the d'Rabbanans were not put in force in a case of a chole. So the bishul akum is also a d'Rabbanan that also falls away in the place of a chole. As far as other people eating, so in the bishul akum case, the sick person can only eat on Shabbos. Once Shabbos is over, that same food that was cooked can't be eaten anymore, because at that point, a Jew can cook now. So they don't need to use the d'Rabbanan's only waived as long as it's necessary to waive it. There's no other available way. So if a sick person needed food on Shabbos, whatever the case was, and the non-Jew cooked the food for them, so that food is mutter as long as it's Shabbos. The minute Shabbos ends, the chole can't violate that d'Rabbanan, even though d'Rabbanans aren't put for chole, because there is a permissible avenue where the Jew could then cook the new food. So that food, and regarding other people, so only the chole could eat. Anyone else could not eat from that food if they're not a chole. And as far as benefiting, if it's not a bishul akum, let's say the tea. So let's say there's a sick person. So the non-Jew cooks the tea for the sick person who's legitimately sick. So now can the healthy person partake of the tea? So this now, where it comes to bishul akum, so the food itself is compromised. So only the sick person could eat. The healthy person couldn't eat from it. Okay, but here where the food isn't compromised, it's the act of cooking. So he cooked for the sick person. It's the same cooking. So then we would actually apply the same laws that we applied when the non-Jew was doing something for himself and you. There would be no difference, and if you think about it, this will just make sense. There's no difference between a non-Jew cooking for himself and for you, and for cooking for a chole and for you. In both cases, the cooking is permissible as it relates to the non-Jew, as it relates to the chole. You're the secondary issue. So it doesn't matter if the reason the cooking is permissible is because a non-Jew is allowed to cook for himself, versus if the non-Jew is cooking for a sick Jew, which is permissible. So therefore, if the making of the tea was done by inserting the plug in the urn because the water was there, so just like the sick person can eat, the non-sick person can also help themselves to a cup of tea, because the act of the non-Jew is the same act both for the sick person and the non-sick person. Or to put it in a more basic thing, if the sick person needed the light on for whatever reason, I mean, imagine scenarios, but the sick person needs the light on. So if the light gets flicked on to the sick person, then the healthy person can read in that room also, because that would be no different than if the non-Jew turned the light on for himself and the Jew can read, because that's the same act will work for the non-Jew and for the Jew. The same act will work for the sick Jew and the healthy Jew. But if there's an additional act, for example, if the non-Jew had to add water to the urn for the sick person, then the healthy person could not partake in the tea, because then that extra would have been done specifically for the healthy person in the same way. So whatever the halacha would be when a non-Jew does a malacha for himself, and therefore the Jew can latch on, that same halacha would apply when the non-Jew does it for the sick person. Wherever the Jew could benefit when the non-Jew did it for himself, the Jew could benefit when the non-Jew did it for the sick person, because it's the same idea. It's the non-Jew's act is permissible, and there's nothing additionally done for the Jew who's not permissible. All right, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, clear as mud. I'm trying to think of practical. I keep saying, like, okay, so we can't add more water because that water presumably was added because of you, you only use this one.
Correct, because you're drinking it, so it was added for you, for you.
Right, so I'm imagining a cooking scenario. I can only think of either pasta or scrambled eggs, but neither of those is really practical, right? So it doesn't really matter which one.
Right.
Like, is there something practical that we can see, like, okay, the Gentiles anyway cooking? Pasta, whole pasta, like, I'm trying to think of, is there something practical, like, I can't even imagine what a Gentile would have to cook for me.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe tiny little. In a hospital, okay, that's certainly a situation. I mean,
Yeah, so the simplest is the urn because it actually is the most likely scenario to take place, where it's the difference in plugging in the urn and adding water to the urn. That really is the simplest thing. Now, turning the light on, I'm just trying to, I mean, that's the post can bring that because that's the case that the Mishnah and the Gemara use the idea of the sick person needing a candle lit or a candle extinguished. Now, going to sleep is going to be easier because that there's no direct benefit. So that's just an easier case. You'd have to find a case where the sick person, the simplest case would be a person is bedridden, and in order to function, they need a light on and they just can't get up and get the light. But they need the light. They need whatever they're going to do. They need light for. So I'm sure they're doing something that is necessary for their illness. Let's say they have to be able to. I don't know. They have to be able to see the pill and whatever it is. It can be the most basic thing. They need to be able to get the medicine out of the medicine container. So they need the light on. So, and they can't, so they need the light to take medicine, and they can't turn the light on themselves. So they'll ask the non-Jew to turn the light on. Okay, in a hospital, it makes a lot more sense, right? So then we put a situation like this. If you say, a person is in a hospital, they're in a situation where they can't get up. They need the light on to be able to do the non-Jew turns the light on. So the question is, could the Jew who's sitting there, attending to, just visiting, taking care of him on Shabbos, can he then read in the room? So the answer would be yes. That's one act for both. Whereas,
Could he share food with Cola that was cooked, that was heated up on Shabbos by the kitchen staff? Seemed like more complicated.
It would seem to be more complicated. So it's certainly if there was a bishul akum element in it, it would be no. I don't know how hospital food works, and that would go from food to food. Is it pre-cooked in the light?
Late dinners, right?
Yeah.
Frozen pre-cooked meals.
Okay, so
like airplane food. That's
right. So if it
right,
because it's edible. I mean, it's supposedly so cooked already. It's edible as it is. Okay, so you'd have to know if that's really an issue. But as far as the nana, let's say having the warm food, so if it's, I mean, you'd be taking food away from the sick person. But let's say hypothetically, they were given a meal and the sick person didn't want something that was in the whole meal, right? So it would seem to be based on this that the healthy person would be able to eat the warmed up thing that was warmed up in it was part of one dish, one tray, put in all at once. The button was pressed on the microwave all at once. It was heated up all at once. That would probably be similar to plugging in the urn. And so I guess if the sick person didn't want, because again, it can't be where it's like the sick person eats and there's like extra. Then it's really be done for the other person. So if it's going to go to the garbage and the sick person says, "I'm not going to eat it," you want to eat it. So it would seem to be that's okay. I don't,
Colette ordered 2 dinners, which you can do. I went Sunday and I was so hungry. I ate like every kosher dinner. But that would be if I had. I mean, that was me. I know there was nobody there with me.
Right. So if you ordered 2 dinners and for one for the other person, like that would be a problem. Yeah. I mean, because even if they were put in together, it's still 2 acts of cooking. I mean, that would be like adding the water.
So actually, one of the, I think Lutheran General in Chicago,
Ridge or whatever.
They had a thing when my boys were very little, like when I had babies and I was very low key. But they had one of the caterers who sent in food. Every person that had a baby got 2 meals. It was like a steak dinner or something, one for the father and one for the mother. And they actually, so that's like, obviously you would have to say, like, I can't take it, I take it Friday, I can take it on Shabbos, I can't take it, but that's very interesting to think about that. I didn't have baby there, so.
Oh, Evanston does it too.
Oh,
Right
oh,
before
I'm sorry, St.
discharge.
Francis, we were in Evanston, but not Evanston Hospital, but
Oh.
yeah, that's interesting.
It's right before discharge.
It's what?
It's right before discharge. You get a fan and they do it in a table with a tablecloth and.
Never heard such a before. Okay, thank you for that. I don't know for addiction.
And then I go to Israel and have my second. Go help yourself.
Serve yourself.
All right, the next thing, which is a leniency in halacha as we relate to an illness, is lack of heat is considered a debilitating overall situation. Yeah.
We were talking about the 6 cases of Isurei Doraisa that can be done. Ask for Gentile beheter. So, Beta Shmashos
Is
we talked
one.
about that whole thing. We talked about the Sigreja. Is number 3 the life threatening? Is that
No, life threatening is everything's about
That's
to.
really good.
It's a chole she'ein bo sakar, right? Okay.
And this is number 4?
This is all part of 3. We're still in chole. Okay. So the halacha views if a person is cold, that is considered a illness that affects the whole body. Now, if you're a person who does not like the cold, like myself, I get this 100%. When you're cold, it's debilitating. It wrecks the entire body. So the halacha is that if someone is cold, meaning they are feeling a lack of heat, so then you can ask a non-Jew to play with the thermostat to turn on the heat, even though that is most definitely an Isser D'Oraisa. It is still going to be allowed because this will be considered a person is a chola when they are cold. Now, I suppose one does need to differentiate between it's a little chilly and we're spoiled Americans versus it's cold. So, you get a room, these numbers are not absolute, but you get a room that's at 66, 65 maybe, put on a sweater. You go to 63, 62, 61, that's, I think, universally understood as cold. Certainly when you get to the numbers where where the landlords aren't allowed to go lower than that, that would be like officially this is unacceptably cold. So then you could have a non-Jew turn on the heat. This would be most relevant at the beginning of a season where you get a cold day before you hop to turn the heat on. You could have the non-Jew turn the heat on. Elderly and children will always be more susceptible to this, and therefore it's more lenient, but it doesn't need to be the elderly it could be a regular healthy person, but when they are very cold, that becomes, a all-encompassing problem. So you can ask a non-Jew to do that. The truth is, it goes the other way as well with being excessively hot. The thing with that is it's easier to be lenient because it's almost always a strict electricity issue, meaning whereas you're working with a furnace, you're working with Doraisa, because whatever you're burning, whether it be gas, heating, or whatever is making the heat, it's almost always a fire. I don't know if they have pure electricity house, certainly not in the Midwest, but they have house heaters that are purely electric.
Baseboard heating would be purely electric, wouldn't it? Yeah.
On the whole house works that way?
If a person has electric, and what happens is,
Yeah.
supply entire
Right.
apartment complexes with
Pure electric heating.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just because it doesn't have a furnace?
Or
it's cheaper than putting that it's not
so expensive, and the removal and
this is just easier. Okay.
Could be fixed for a few years.
Fine. So yeah, okay. So then it's possible you'd have to know it's still possible there, depending on how it's working. It could be that the coils are on fire. So heating is way more likely to involve a doraisa. If you are, again, heating gas, if you're a radiator, you're boiling water, all those things are all going to be Isurei doraisa. So that's why we bring this in the context of Kol Shein Bo Sakana, because it's a bigger novelty. When it comes to air conditioning and being excessively hot, so air conditioning is almost always exclusively electricity. I mean, it's a fan and it's blowing over. So there, the truth is that the whole threshold is less, because the minute it's a michush ba'alma, you're just uncomfortable. So technically, you can ask a non-Jew to do a durabanan. So it'd be a shvus to shvus. Where you would need this would be, it's hard to imagine just the way the world works, that this would actually be practical, but theoretical. If your air conditioning wouldn't be off, but if it would break, so you needed it to be fixed on Shabbos. So to fix something is almost always going to be a doraisa, a maku patish, or bona, especially if something is attached to the ground, it's going to be bona. So when you're talking about turning on the air conditioning or flicking the temperature, it's almost always a durabanan issue. Once you're dealing with something that's broken, then it's almost always going to be a doraisa to fix it. From a practical standpoint, I don't know if it's practical to have an appliance like an air conditioner break on Shabbos and be able to communicate to a guy to have it fixed that same day. I just don't know if that's practical. I suppose the case would be more relevant if the air conditioning was broken and he could only come on Shabbos to fix it. All right, so that would be it. There'd be better ways to do that and worse ways to do it, but it's conceptually permitted, because excessive heat would also be considered a chola. The difference is the poskim are more lenient with slight cold. It takes a lot more heat to be sick as opposed to being uncomfortable than it takes from cold. I guess the assumption being that cold is more debilitating than heat. This would probably depend on who you were, but heat will become a sakana quicker than cold will be. I mean, cold could definitely be a sakana, but I would doubt. It's hard to imagine anyone sticking around a situation where the cold could actually become a sakana. I mean, that would really mean you're not in your house, or your house isn't functioning as a house. Heat, if you have a issue, especially elderly or the young, you have dehydration, heat could really become a sakana quicker than, so you'd go somewhere else. Well, if that's not a possibility, so then it could theoretically become a sakana dika issue. But long before that, it will be a michush. So as long as it can be fixed with a simple turning on, it's always going to be easy to do. You just ask the non-Jew directly. When it involves fixing, so then it's slightly more complicated. There will be cases that will also be okay, but that will really depend on A, how hot it is, B, what other options you have. Because again, it's happening before Shabbos. Usually you can opt out and go somewhere else if it's really that bad. And if it happens on Shabbos, it's very unlikely to imagine that the person's going to be able, you're not just not able to contact them and have them come and do it. It's just not, in my experience, how these things work. So, yeah.
So what about the case where you have a portable air conditioner? So that, like, in Israel, we had a portable that breaks. You find somebody who has an extra one to carry it over and plug it in.
So that would be okay to have a guy do that, assuming that it was uncomfortably hot. Yes, right. Yeah, that's what that. Fan. Right. That's what we're saying. That since it's only a durabanan, it's a much lower threshold to make it mutter. You don't need the high level of. You don't need to be sick. You just need to be uncomfortable. To be uncomfortably hot is not a very high threshold. To be sickly hot, it seems to be the poskim think you get sick from being cold quicker than you're getting sick from being hot. I don't know if this has to do with the idea that people connect, like you stand in the cold to getting sick, meaning I don't know if this is based on a misinformation. It's hard for me because I know the feeling. When I'm hot, I'm annoyed, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm not like, if I'm cold, I like just want to shut down, crawl in a ball, and like go under a car. I don't want to do anything. It's when you talk about the idea of being nofel and mishka, of going when I'm really hot, I don't want to lay down. I might want to run out of my skin, but it's like it's a totally different feel. When you're cold, it's like get me out of here, so type of thing. So I get it where being excessively cold is you're sick, and being excessively hot is you're annoyed. And okay, so
also we think historically speaking, they had very few things they could actually do about cold.
Correct.
Without being too hot and wishing to be cold, besides wishing. And saying but the heat, there's something to do, and people did, like catching a cold was considered life threatening, and people were very frightened of catching not just a like sinus infection, but like the cold
virus.
So yeah.
I think it also has to do with they knew how to. The heat was normal, so they built their house. They had underground areas. They had shaded stone area. They built their world to deal with the heat. The cold was abnormal, and it's like that. It's like that in Israel now today. The buildings are built much better for the heat than it is for the cold.
Yeah, the very same materials that are good for hot weather, like stone floors,
are bad. Yeah. So I would imagine that has something to do with it as well. Okay, let's just finish this idea. We have two more concepts. By number one, children less than the age of 3 are always considered a chola regarding their needs. So when you have I don't know what the good English, an infant up to toddler, up to 3, they say in halacha, is automatically in a chazaka of being sick. That has to do with they don't have a pain tolerance. Everything is the end of the world for them. Right? They say by the baby, the baby being hungry, it's to the baby that's like the end of the world. The baby screams and shrieks because I don't know how they know this because you can't talk to a baby, but this is what they say, that the baby is experiencing a full body, all-encompassing pain when they feel hungry. But the idea is whether it's because of the fragile nature, the developmental nature, or this element, halacha views 0 to 3 as being sick halachically. So really any type of ailment or any type of issue with a 3 or less, you will be able to tend to with medicine. That would be not strict rabbanan, or through a guy with a daraisa. The example they like to give is food. If a child has very specific eating habits and they won't eat except certain things, so then it means the kid's not eating, so then you could start, they use the example of mashing or chopping up thin. These are things that could possibly be malachos with, let's say, a carrot or something, or a potato, to mash it. So you're treading on the oraisas of tochen and the like. So this is where you'd have a non-Jew do that, like a banana or something, crush it up into, or an apple to make it into applesauce, something that a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old could eat if they weren't eating something else, and this is what they would eat. So that would be permissible. I don't know how often that would ever come up, but that's the examples that are brought down. So it automatically becomes a chol l'shein v'sakana. So you could ask a non-Jew essentially to do whatever they need to do to take care of the physical needs of a little kid. 3 to 9 years old is a shaila, depends on the nature of the kid. And once a kid hits 10 in halacha, then they are considered to be a regular person. But there is general leniency if a 3 to 9 year old has a stomach ache or has an ailment or whatever. So you could be more lenient giving them medicine because it's the rabbanan, and the threshold to what's considered a chola for a little kid is just much less. And that's what it boils down to. Okay. And the last thing I want to talk about with this is mental illness. Why is it not here? Oh, here it is. Okay.
I have one, so number 1 is children of 3 are always considered chol l'shein v'sakana.
3 to 9. Okay, so 3 to 9 is
number 2, part
Yeah, 3 to 9, you have to see what the nature of the kid is. Okay, after 9, I mean, obviously 9 is going to be less likely than 3, but the point is that that's a grayer area. And 10, the default is the kid is already normal and he can be treated like an adult in, this, an adult being 12 and 13. So in these regards. All right, so the last thing is mental illness. It's brought in the terms of a child, but it can be extrapolated by the poskim beyond that. They discuss the child who is mortally scared of the dark, and his room is, the light is off, and he can't deal with it. So when they usually discuss this, so people like, okay, so just get into another room. Okay, because we think of houses as having 12 different rooms to deal with. For most of history, house was 2 rooms at best. If you were lucky, you had 2 rooms. Okay, otherwise it usually was one area that was sectioned off. So this becomes the case law case, but we'll be able to extrapolate. They say if the child is petrified of the dark and there is no light available, there's just nowhere to take the kid because you just don't have 12 different rooms to go with. So then you could ask a non-Jew to do a malacha, turn on a light or something, so the kid does not go crazy. So from here, the poskim derive from this that severe mental anguish is viewed in halacha as a chol she'ein bo sakana. If the anxiety would be created to the point where the person's life would be in danger, then it'd be a chol she'yesh bo sakana. If it was, okay, a small bout of nerves or whatever, anxiety a little bit, that would probably be a michush ba'alma. But the point is, halacha recognizes this as a legitimate thing. So it just needs to be extrapolated out. A person who has a suffering from a mental condition will be able to take medicine for that. Many times, anything that requires medicine is already in the category of being, because they're worried about suicide. So it's considered it could come to sakana and it's mutter because of that stam. But even if that wasn't the case, where it wasn't a severe depression or a severe anxiety, where that was a concern, it was a debilitating. Anyone who's experienced such a situation knows that's the definition of a debilitating illness, of again, not just you're worried about something, but a real bout of mental anxiety could easily classify as being a total debilitating situation. So the medicine there would be okay. That also would be given on a daily basis. But as it relates to the Mir La'akum, so to solve such a thing or to get medicine for such a person or whatever it is, that would also then become permitted. One of the fascinating examples they gave, and again, this really, how novel it is, has to do with exactly how a phone works, if the connecting of a phone is a doraisa or not. But they discussed the situation where a person was being taken to the hospital and the mother, I don't remember if in the case it was the mother's kid or the mother's parent, but it was the middle-aged person was stuck at home and the other person was going to the hospital. And she said she needs to know she's just going crazy. So it was they mattered the nurse to call the house and leave a message on the machine to update the person. And again, even though essentially this isn't a mere lock, you're telling the nurse to call. Listening to the message is not the issue per se, but you're telling the nurse to make a phone call to calm the nerves of another person. So that they said that's if the person is really, you have to know yourself. Are you curious or are you really like it's driving you crazy? So theoretically, if it's driving you crazy, then yes, you can arrange with the nurse. So they have it both ways, where the person calls the hospital by asking a non-Jew to call the hospital, or the patient or whoever's with the patient asks the nurse to leave a message on the phone. Either way, that's going to be mutter. Now, if a phone call is derabanan, then it's less novel, because then it's a lower threshold of anguish, because it just needs to be a michush, a discomfort to allow the double the rabbanan. But if it's a doraisa to make a phone call, and I need to look. My guess is that some hold it is, because I know we discuss in halacha doing the shinui, so that would usually imply that there's a concern of a Torah prohibition. I suppose the Torah prohibition would be the making the connect. I don't know how a phone works well enough, but the making the connection to connect the lines to. That could be considered a binyan or a machel patish or something like that, similar to an electric current. So therefore, it might be treated by some as doraisa. So just to make the point more is that the mental anguish could be considered an illness enough to justify doing that. Now, this can't be taken like out like a person going into labor and the mother's, I need to know if it's a boy or a girl. It probably, unless the mother has a otherwise diagnosed issue, she probably can wait until after Shabbos to find out, and you don't need the guide to it. And if she really can't, so again, the odds are this is not the first time we're coming up with this, but that obviously you wouldn't do. But if the person was, I don't know, they were in a situation where it's, unclear how they're progressing, and it's really, life for that type of thing, and the person really is going crazy not to know, so there is room to be lenient. They talk about if a kid gets locked in an area, so the kid's not really in danger per se. Let's say he gets locked in a closet, but he could freak out, that you could then break down the door. That this is brought in various different ways where the mental anguish would then become the chola. And yes, in halacha, it's a legitimate thing. So
you can break down the door, you can destroy property to take care of that child. Can you also use a screwdriver?
Yeah, I mean,
that might be the easiest
right, you'd find the best way to do it. The screwdriver is not going to be usher at all, because that's going to be a cliche after isser used in a proper way. But your issues there would be destroying a parts of houses is going to certainly be durabanan, possibly doraisa, depending on how it's exactly done. But yeah, that would be an example. Various different cases you can imagine where there is a true, again, there's no real danger. That's why I said in the case where in the beginning, when you said the person is in pain, but it could be a mental thing also, but that also hurts, so if it's debilitating, it's debilitating. It's not dangerous, and that's just the reality. The kid in the dark room is not going to get hurt, and the kid in the closet is going to live. I mean, assuming he's not there for real extended periods of time, he's going to survive. But he's panicking, he's going crazy. That could then justify a case of chola. Okay, and that will be number 3. We'll start the number 4 case next time.